Hi everybody. We're recording this meeting because not everybody can make it, and we wanted to have it available to people who weren't able to be here today, who are secretaries, so that they can benefit from this discussion as well. As you all know, council passed a code of ethics that involves both the council members and committee and commission members as signatories to the document and people who should abide by it. And then also we've been getting we haven't here in Emeryville, thankfully, but other local jurisdictions have been getting Zoom bombed with very profane people calling into the meetings on Zoom and saying really inappropriate things. And so we're taking some steps to limit that behavior from disrupting meetings. And so those are the two things that we're going to talk about today, is the code of ethics, and then also some strategies that we're putting in place and that you all as committee members will have to help effectuate if you're running a meeting where a Zoom bomber comes in to create havoc. And so that's sort of the very high level overview. John Kennedy is here, your city attorney, to kind of help walk through some of the nuances of this, and then we can just have a discussion and do questions and answers. If that works, I'll turn it over to you, John, to provide some more details for folks.
Great, thanks, Paul. So I think folks received the staff report and the actual code of ethics and conduct for elected and appointed city officials that was included as part of the meeting announcement. So hopefully you have that. I think the staff report really provides a good summary and background as to why the city council adopted this code of ethics and conduct. And some of the highlights are that this was based on the city of Barstow's existing code of conduct and ethics. There was some minor changes, but it really governs kind of how the city council interacts with city staff, other members of the appointed city official family, and also the public. And then there's also provisions that affect how appointed city officials interact with staff and amongst themselves and members of the council as well. So it applies both to the city council and to appointed city officials. So if there's any specific questions that you have about any of that, I'm happy to answer them, but I think it's fairly straightforward. The first section on the policy establishes a code of ethics, talks about what they need to do in order to abide by that policy. And then the second part talks about their conduct, how they're supposed to interact with the public, with city staff, with city council members. And then the third section talks about sanctions for violations of the code. And that's divided into two parts. One is the process and possible sanctions that would apply to council members. And then the second section talks about sanctions that could be imposed on members of boards, committees, and commissions. And just be aware that the reason for the difference is the city council is the appointing authority for advisory and appointed city officials, whereas the voters are the appointing authority for members of the city council. So city council members can't remove another city council member from the city council, but they can remove members of boards, committees, and commissions from their positions because they are the appointing authority. In addition, there could be other sanctions that get imposed, and those are kind of spelled out in that section, as well as the process for how the city council would go about imposing sanctions. So if you have any questions on any of that, I'm happy to answer your questions at this point, but hopefully you'll find this fairly straightforward. Matt, I see you have a question.
I always have questions. So I have a few questions, I guess, about the kind of both the sanctions and the conduct section. The conduct seems to indicate, I believe it was conduct, maybe it was one of the other sections, that it was conduct both in professional settings but also in private. And as you may be aware, we've had committee members and council members disagree with each other on public platforms. And council members have come to my committee before and, told committee members that they are not adhering to decorum. I believe they use the word decorum. And so I see this, passing this as a potential, way of enforcing views that or kind of getting rid of views that are unliked or disagreements that aren't necessarily that could be handled in the public sphere, but are maybe I don't know. It's kind of a larger question, but I guess I want to see if there were considerations for that, or you had any thoughts on the matter.
Well, when they're acting even in social media, they're acting in their role as a city official, right? They're identifying themselves as just a city official, and they're, setting forth their position on things, which is perfectly fine to do on social media. But the code of conduct is intended to show, well, there's a certain threshold that you have to follow here. One is that you need to practice civility and decorum in discussion and debate. So name calling, personal attacks, all of those things could potentially violate the code based on that section. Also, there's a section that says avoid personal comments that could offend other members. You can certainly disagree on a policy matter, but if you're making personal comments about an individual, that individual may feel like that's not a policy debate, that's a personal attack on me for maybe the way I talk, the way I look, the way I dress, any of those kinds of things, those could potentially rise to the level of violating the code. But I also just want to point out that under sanctions, it's really the city council that brings any kind of sanctions forward for alleged violations. So for council members, there needs to be a council member who brings forth a complaint at a city council meeting and asks that it be agendized as a future agenda item. And then the same as well for members of boards, committee, and commissions. There is an exception that if the city manager or the city attorney believe that an investigation is warranted regarding the conduct of a member of the board, committee, or commission, they can confer with the city council as warranted, but otherwise it's really within the purview of the city council.
Okay, I'm going to throw a hypothetical out there. Say I'm on Twitter, I'm a committee member and you're a council member, and I say, I think your position on, hypothetically, housing is a dumb one because it will not allow new people to move into Emeryville and will reduce the tax base, or XYZ reasons. Not calling you any names, but potentially calling your position names and disagreeing with your position. You as a council member could at any point then bring me up to the council for potential expulsion from that committee for this, for the sole reason of anything I say on Twitter. Does that
Not
sound
anything
about
you
right?
say, it's what
Well,
you say.
yes,
How you say that, right?
I see that, but you can interpret that a lot of different ways, right?
Right. Well, the question for the city council would be, is that city official practicing civility and decorum in discussion and debate? So that's really, this isn't a legal standard. This is a code of conduct for the city, and the city council enforces it. So the question for the city council is going to be, does that comment on Twitter rise to the level of violating that provision, or potentially rise to the level of violating the personal comments that could offend other members? So that would be the question for the city council, and it's by majority vote. So it's not just one city council member bringing this forward. It takes the entire city council a majority to determine what sanction is appropriate.
Okay, and
So I
in
think
terms
the
of
cautionary tale is if appointed city officials want to avoid potentially matters being brought to the city council and potentially avoid the sanction section, they really should monitor how they're conducting themselves, both in the public sphere and also on Twitter, to the extent that they're identified as city officials and they're discussing matters regarding the city of Emeryville.
So I guess to clarify there, even if they're just, it's your name on any sort of public social media, you don't identify with the city of Emeryville whatsoever, that still counts as being an official, conducting yourself as an official in the public sphere, correct?
Right.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And then in terms of agendizing, any single council member can agendize that correctly. There doesn't need to be a majority vote to agendize that.
Well, so if you're familiar with how the city council works, there's a section on the agenda that talks about future council agenda items. So that's where they would bring it up. And then it would require a majority of the city council to say, yes, let's put this on a future council agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification.
Valerie, I saw you had your hand up. I don't know if your question got answered in that back and forth, or if you still want to add anything.
I mean, Matt, just to go back to your point, like we all as professionals working for the city realize we have to conduct ourselves in a certain manner when we talk with our colleagues, when we work with others, when we're interfacing with the public, when we're interfacing with city officials. So when we're all subject to potential discipline, if we don't act in accordance kind of with those standards, right? So it's kind of a similar thing that's being applied to both elected and appointed officials as well.
And then I think, like you said, the check and balance is it has to be a majority of council who agrees that the issue needs to be agendized. If you would, as a single individual council member, you wouldn't be empowered to say like, oh, that person annoyed me. I'm gonna try to get them off this committee, or I don't like that person, or whatever, and like try to stretch those boundaries. So, I mean, I think that's the balance that got struck.
I mean, that said, as a single council member, you could still put it on a future agenda items to to bring up for review any particular committee member, right?
You could propose it, but it wouldn't go on the agenda unless you got a majority of your colleagues to vote in favor of it. So,
right.
So that's why you could, it could be one council member who's like, I don't like the way this person treated me, and I want to agendize this for a future council meeting. And if nobody else agrees, then that's the end of that.
Okay.
Correct. And there are many cities that have, and the policy that Emeryville adopted is very similar to what's in effect in a number of California cities. In kind of researching this question, I had a whole laundry list of various cities throughout the state of California that have adopted code of ethics and conduct, and this is very much in line with those other examples that are out there.
That said, I take your point, and I mean, we don't want to chill debate or chill people from like expressing their opinions. You just have to be, thoughtful about how they do it and do it in a way that's not disparaging. You can criticize the idea, but not the person.
I think thank you. I really appreciate that, and I 100% agree. I think, when we present this to our committees and whatnot, also it'd be great if we could present it in that lens. But we're still very much encouraging that debate. I appreciate that, Frank.
Yeah, totally.
And then the one other thing I would note is that at the end of the policy, there's an acknowledgement section that the appointed city official is going to be asked to sign, that they've read and understood the code of ethics and conduct. And I think Lorraine's going to set it up so that can be all sent out via DocuSign. So you might want to let your committee members and commission members and board members know that will be coming in the near future as well. Josie, you have a question.
Yes, thanks. Just curious, a follow-up to what you shared about other cities that have very similar policies in place. And did you find any information on how often this gets used in those cities and sort of how the implementation of this has gone? Because I imagine that in a lot of ways it's good to have this on the book. So if an issue does arise, we have a process in place and a foundation to proceed forward. But I could also see it getting maybe overused or over abused. And so I'm just wondering if in your research you had come across any information about how this has been implemented in other cities.
We haven't, that wasn't part of what we were asked to do, but my understanding is that it doesn't get invoked very often. And it gets invoked in circumstances where there's been a kind of a consistent and pretty serious violation of how these individuals are conducting themselves.
You know, and I could just add to that is that we had that same concern, Josie, and one of the things that we were saying to them in individual meetings and at the committee at least was like, we don't want this to be weaponized. We don't want this to be a thing that like initiates a lot of discord and people like, hey, I'm going to put my code of ethics on you for this and that and the other. So, you know, hopefully it's just like you're saying, we have this process in place in case we need it, but it's not something that gets kind of abused. But we did also have a little bit of that worry. I still have a little bit of it, but we'll see. Any other questions?
Valerie.
I see. That's why you asked about Valerie. No, this is Amber. I've logged
Oh.
in as Valerie because we have a shared Zoom account. This is Amber. On the Public Art Committee, hypothetically, someone's just kind of nasty and other members have resigned because of that. Are there any recourses?
The recourses would be the sanctions section, where a council member would bring a formal complaint against a board, committee, or commission member for violation of the Code of Ethics and Conduct. So certainly staff or others can bring this to the attention of a council member. There's also a process where if the city manager or city attorney believe that investigation is warranted, they shall confer with the city council as warranted. That I'm hoping is going to be very rarely used because I don't think Paul and I want to be in the position of investigating board members and committee members and finding out what happened. But certainly, you know, all of your meetings, I believe, are taped. And so there should be a clear record of their behavior. And you can certainly bring that to the attention of a council member and see if they want to proceed with some of the possible sanctions that are outlined in the policy.
Yeah, so I would ask that you bring it to me and then I would work with the council member on it. And even as an interim step, you know, I'd be fine to talk with the person individually and try to coach them on being more civil as sort of an interim discussion point. You know, I could attend a meeting and sort of observe and then talk with the person. Because that obviously that's also something that's going to limit participation if people feel like, oh, I'm going to go to this committee and get attacked or treated poorly by this person. It's kind of the point of the part of one of the points of the Code of Ethics is to be able to have a recourse in that regard, but maybe starting with the conversation, and I'd be happy to help with that.
It may raise to that level. It may not. We'll see.
Okay, just let me know.
Matt, you have a question?
I'll be brief this time. Just following up on your comment, timeline in terms of potentially sending this out to our committee members. We haven't approximately when that might be.
Well, this has already been enacted by the city council. This was enacted at their last meeting, so it's in effect. So I believe I don't want to speak for April, but I believe the idea would be that the committee secretaries forward this on to their members, or I don't know if Lorraine is going to be forwarded on to the members.
I think what we talked about, John, is that Lorraine would send out an email with the Code of Ethics attached and some information. I'm hoping that you can help her draft the email. and telling them that there's a page that they need to sign in it, and that will be coming separately in DocuSign. This will help us track the signers, and we have all of the information then in one place for who has signed and who hasn't. Lorraine, did I get that right?
That was also my understanding.
Great.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kim.
So that means that we don't, because I have 2 committee meetings coming up, that we don't need to agendize this in preparation for them, that the email will be self-explanatory and there's nothing else that we need to do.
Right, council's already enacted this, so it's an informational item at this point. We don't need to agendize it, no.
And to the extent that folks have questions, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm hoping there's not an avalanche of calls about different situations, but I am happy. I mean, maybe to the extent that members have questions, if it does get to be a really large number, we could potentially put together a Zoom call on it to talk about it for those that have questions, or they can just contact me individually. I think it would kind of depend on how many questions and to what extent they have questions. So maybe that would be a good thing to suss out with your committees, boards, and commissions, and we can kind of decide on a path forward of how to handle those questions.
And then, you don't have to agendize it, but you could, and your committees better than we do. So if you feel like they would benefit from a discussion on it, feel free to agendize it. That's totally appropriate.
Rebecca, you have a question.
Yeah, well, you kind of just answered it, because I was going to say for some committees, like I'm thinking of the COA, would it be appropriate to have you as a guest star on the Zoom to answer any of their questions, or do you want us to just give your email for any questions that they might have? So, not pointing out COA, but they might have more questions maybe than others that might need some explanation beyond.
How about maybe checking in with the members, and if they do feel like they're going to have a significant number of questions that they, I can attend one of their meetings, that would be fine, and we add it to the agenda and we can answer any questions at that point.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, we can move on to the next topic then. And obviously just stay in touch if you have questions as we go along, like we said. The Zoom bombing, whatever you call it, the inappropriate Zoom behavior in public meetings. Again, I'm just going to turn it over to John to kind of provide some advice and information about what we're doing and what you can do.
So thanks, Paul. This came to our attention. This is happening at a number of different jurisdictions where folks are coming in under either general public comment, or it might even be under public comment for specific agenda items, and really discussing items that are offensive and intended to disrupt a meeting and not necessarily contribute to the meeting. And there was a recent change in state law as a result of COVID, where more teleconferencing is happening now, that allows the city council and other public bodies to remove folks that are disruptive to a meeting. It's a fairly high standard. There is going to be language that is going to be added to the city council's agenda that states that the city something to the effect that the city council welcomes comments, including criticisms about the policies, procedures, programs, or services of the city, or of the acts or omissions of the city council. Speakers shall not use threatening, profane, or abusive language which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of a meeting. The city is committed to maintaining a workplace free of unlawful harassment, and is mindful that city staff regularly attend public meetings. Discriminatory statements or conduct that would potentially violate the Fair Employment and Housing Act. For example, statements or conduct that is hostile, intimidating, oppressive, or abusive is per se disruptive to a meeting and will not be tolerated. So that's what the city council is going, I believe, going to be adding to its agenda. We suggest potentially that boards, committees, and commissions might also want to consider adding the same language to the agenda to the extent that you're concerned about meetings being disrupted by Zoom bombings, and you want a tool in order to remove the offending party from the meeting. But there is kind of a process that you would need to follow as the secretary for the meetings. We would advise that you read the statement that's on the agenda about disruptive meetings, that the chair or the secretary indicate that the meeting is being disruptive in violation of this policy, and as a result, the offending party is being removed from the meeting. Do folks have any questions, or April or Paul, do you want to add anything to that?
I just wanted to say that this, the Zoom bombing has not occurred at any, anything other than council meetings, locally, except for the, zoning adjustments board in Berkeley was, hit last week. But they're mostly going after, we're presenting this as an advisory, informational item because we want you guys to be aware of this, that this potentially could happen. But it most likely won't. At an advisory body level. So don't panic, I guess is what I want to say. It's, you know, Livermore, Walnut Creek, those types of council meetings have been completely disrupted and derailed. And it came to my attention, not because of the newspaper articles, but because of another clerk reaching out from the city of Monterey. And she was deeply distressed that she had participated in this type of a meeting and was calling names and had to listen to this vulgar and anti-Semitic language. So part of the reason that we're looking at this also is because employees of the city should not be exposed to this type of language and this type of behavior also. And we want to be protective of our city staff and know that you do have some tools if things start happening during the meeting. My first reaction would always be to ask the chair for a recess and just stop the meeting and, you know, converse with the chair and figure out exactly what the plan is. But you need to have a plan in place beforehand too. And so John's suggesting some tools that we can use to bring the meeting back under control. And, you know, the chair and staff are the ones who are in control of the meeting, not the public. So if you're running your Zoom meetings the right way, you have the ability to turn off video, to turn off audio. You should always be using the features in Zoom to do that. And you know, you can mute people, you can take a break. So the likelihood of this happening is not high. But it's something to be aware of and something that is happening in the Bay Area. And we just want you guys to be aware.
Matt, you have
Matt?
I love having questions. I maybe have set up my Zoom meetings the incorrect way, but my understanding is that we don't have, I forget the type of access, but as a committee, we have a different level of Zoom account than the planning commission or council. And so I haven't been able, I can mute people, but they can then unmute themselves again, is the level of control that I have. And I don't think I can increase that control, but I would love to know if other committees can, if that's something, perhaps I'm doing it incorrectly or there's a way around that.
So I'm running a meeting right now. So the Zoom feature that Planning Commission and City Council use is a webinar, and it's a higher level. It's a different type of access. But you're running on the meetings platform, which is what I'm doing here. I have the ability to, you know, put somebody in a waiting room. I have the ability to remove them. I have the ability to mute them, to stop their video. So that should be the level of meeting that you're using.
Yeah, I guess all of those, my question is, I think I just have to enable the waiting room, but anybody who's in the meeting, if I mute them, they can unmute themselves. I mean, similar to this meeting right here, I was asked to mute and unmute, but I can just turn it on and off myself. It's not like, it's controlled by you necessarily. That makes sense, but I'll just adjust my settings a little bit and hopefully that'll take care of any potential problems.
So if I have a question about that, this is a question for April. If you're in the meeting function and you enable the waiting room component, can then the host put somebody in a waiting room, like kind of like jail? Like they can't just break out and come back and like subvert the meeting?
Matt, can I use you as an example? Because I don't use.
Try to
this
break
in
out,
real life.
Matt,
Let me
if you
see.
can.
I'm on
Rubbing-
Matt's picture and I go up to the little blue dots next to Matt's picture and I'm gonna put him in the waiting room.
Oh, Matt's gone.
So if I look at my participants panel, I can see that Matt Anderson is in the waiting room. I can remove him from there or I can admit him. So I'm gonna admit him back in.
Oh,
And Matt can tell you what happened during the time he was in the waiting room. So he is popping back in. There he is.
Matt,
Somebody
we
can hear us
we were
or
all
see us
talking
or
about you.
anything?
Could you get out of there, Matt, or were you stuck?
No, it even politely said the host will admit you when they're ready.
Okay, so maybe
So there
that's
was,
probably the best option then, is just plunk them in the Zoom bomb prison.
great.
Can we call it purgatory? Sorry,
Yes,
sorry,
please.
bad joke, bad joke.
Let's rename it.
I'm getting a timeout.
All right.
All right, so I don't know who raised their hand first, Chad or Amber.
Sure, I'll jump. So I just wanted to point out that waiting room function, you have to consciously enable that, and you do it at the exclusion of password protection. So you have 3 options, as I recall, for the security on a Zoom meeting. One of them is password, the other one is authenticated users, and the third one is waiting room. So you just know that if you set up a community meeting and you're using your personal meeting room for that setting, when you apply that, is going to apply to all of the meetings that you arrange with your personal meeting room ID number. So that's just something I only recently learned, actually, when I set up the PAC meeting last week. So it's just, if anyone has any issues with it, it probably wouldn't hurt to have some Zoom training, but.
So
Yeah.
Chad, I didn't enable the waiting room. I don't ever do that. I always use,
Well, you must have, because you had it, right?
but I was able to put him in there, but I would never, I hate waiting rooms, so I don't ever enable them. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with playing around with your meeting settings and setting up fake meet. I do this all the time. I'm in the council chamber constantly setting up fake meetings to run stuff and figure things out. So while my Zoom settings may not be exactly like yours, I mean, there should be some universal, well, not standard, because everybody does it a tiny bit differently, but, are you on a shared Zoom account too, Chad, or do you have your
Oh,
own?
not anymore. Now I've got webinar enabled account for planning commission, but that was what I saw when I went in there. Because I set it up inadvertently with a waiting room and didn't have a password, and that led to some concerns. Because the template for our agendas has passwords in it, right? Well, where's the password? There wasn't one in that case because it used waiting room instead as a security measure. And now I have not tried to see if there's a waiting room if I do have a password enabled.
Well, this meeting had a password on it. Right?
Is this your webinar account though?
No, this is a meeting. I used meetings specifically because I knew that that's what, and I did not enable the waiting room. So it pops up in the little blue ellipsis and still allows you to
All right, I'll have to try it now. And the rest of this, they do share a Zoom account for PAC and Housing Committee.
Yeah, I think that's why Matt's maybe a little bit different.
Amber, did you have a question?
Yes, I think where this is getting challenging is, some of the points that Chad alluded to, but also the sharing of screen. So we start to lose the ability to see who's in the waiting room or manage that aspect of participation as we share screens, have presentations or items. And I'm not really sure of the best practices of balancing that management, or that requires our laptops being used in a different way from the smart screen, or some best practices that maybe allow us to be monitoring our waiting rooms while managing our, maybe it's just we needed turns. I don't know. It seems like there's a few different levels of engagement that need to be managed and observed.
I mean, I'll respond to that. I use one screen for council meetings. I run most of the presentations and I keep the participant window open. I'm definitely not participating as much as the secretaries are in those advisory body meetings. But I definitely think it's doable for the number of people that attend those meetings. And if you want to talk about some ways, to arrange your screen to get the participant panel just very small up in the corner because the waiting room pops up at the top. I mean, I'm happy to work on all of that with you. I'm no Zoom expert. I've just used it quite a bit, and anything I can do to help make managing the meetings easier. I'm happy to do that. We can do some practice sessions.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I think the more difficult thing than the technical aspect of this will be the judgment call about when somebody's crossed that line into unacceptable behavior. And it is just that, it's a judgment call, so it will be a little tricky. I don't know, John, if you have any advice or scenarios or anything that you think would be helpful for people to hear.
Sure. The default rule is to allow members of the public to comment. They do have that ability under the Brown Act to address their concerns to the city. So that's a default rule. But I think, and I don't think we should necessarily remove speakers that may say a single comment that somebody may or may not find offensive. I think you need to clearly find that comment would be offensive to anyone. It's not, a personal attack like, I don't like how you cut your hair today. It needs to be a little bit more of a higher level to that. If it borders on kind of racist, sexist, homophobic speech, more of like what we call hate speech, that is more along the lines of what would potentially create a hostile work environment. And that is something that I think you should feel more comfortable first providing a warning to the speaker not to engage in that. And if they persist, to remove them from the meeting. So it needs to be kind of a fairly high standard, not just, I don't like you, I don't like what you stand for. It needs to be somewhat more egregious than that. There's no set words that we can give you that say, if this word is spoken, you can remove them from the meeting, because certain words can be interwoven with protected political speech. But if it does rise to the level of being something that is racist or attack somebody based on their ethnicity, origin, their sex, their gender, or religious affiliation, those are all protected classifications in the workplace under California state law. And those are things that we're kind of looking for that would trigger having a commenter being removed from a meeting.
Question. do obscenities automatically hit that line or not?
No.
Okay.
You can interweave an obscenity with political speech. F the community service division. Sorry, Rebecca, but you know.
What did Rebecca do?
Hey.
No, I'm
hey,
just giving you an example.
Sorry,
So
okay.
you
sorry. I
can,
understand.
yes.
Sorry.
Right, nothing personal. But I'm just giving you an example where somebody could use an obscenity, but they're weaving that in with political speech that's protected.
Yeah,
We need something a little bit more than that.
got it. That's helpful.
And then the other area, other than these kind of attacking somebody based on a protected class, is threats. So if somebody says, I know where you live, I will track you down and I will take recourse if you vote this way today, those are threats, right? And that obviously is going to be disruptive to the meeting as well. And obviously the person who it's directed to should feel threatened, but if it's a legitimate threat, you could move to remove them from the meeting at that point as well.
I talked to a couple people in Berkeley about their experience with it, and one of the things they said was that, first of all, some of the names that people use are offensive as their Zoom name, and that they sometimes start off reasonably, so that you're sort of lulled into this, sort of sense of false security, and they say, thank you for, giving me time to speak on this agenda. I'm here to say da da da, and then all of a sudden they're like saying something deeply homophobic or anti-Semitic or racist or whatever it is, and it's not like they're screaming it. It's just sort of you're just suddenly like, what is happening right now? So I think that's something to also be on guard for. It's not just going to be somebody who comes in throwing flame and screaming and yelling, but maybe they start off sounding sort of reasonable and then all of a sudden they're not. So I think it's kind of paying attention to what the Zoom names are and then carefully sort of paying attention to what people are saying. So that's just what I heard. I thought I'd share.
Amber, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just, to put what Paul just said. So once they start in that now, perhaps evenly spoken, diatribe, the content of it being problematic, we are to immediately interrupt and give warning and then mute, if not listen to, and then remove. Are those the 3 steps?
Well, if you see offensive words being used, then you can put that person on mute and read the admonition to them about that this violates the policy. And I mean, there's no one size fits all. If it's so egregious, I would say that you can give them a warning. If there's no indication that there is going to cease that behavior, if they're continuing to talk after that, then you can remove them. But the key is to give them the warning first. And if they continue to engage in that speech and they don't cease their behavior, then you can remove them. Is that helpful?
Yes.
And I don't know if you said this or not, I think you did, but we'll get some language to you that you can use as the admonition.
It's already on the city council agendas, just so you know. When we republished for tonight, we added the new language at the, we put all the public comment information at the last part of the agenda introduction. So that's where the language exists right now.
Any other questions or comments that people have?
And again, we're here to help answer questions. I realize, you might not have a lot of familiarity on this. I realize it's a judgment call for folks. We're just trying to protect staff. We're trying to protect, appointed public officials from speech that's really not protected speech and really should not be part of the public discourse when we're talking about city business.
So if you have questions later or after this meeting, you think of something or you have a concern or whatever, just feel free to share it out with your supervisor or John or me or all of us. And we can help out.
And reach
Okay.
out to me if you have questions about Zoom. Again, happy to do practice things with you, whatever we need to do to get your settings in a place where you're comfortable. Or you're more comfortable, running a meeting.
Thanks, April. Thanks, John. Thank you all. Hopefully this won't happen here, but we want it better prepared than surprised. So. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See y'all later.
Thanks all.